what it's like to work as a cuddle therapist for Cuddlist.
I found this thing that completely changed my world. I didn't know that it existed, and it was so beneficial to me. One misconception: this isn't sex work in so much as any of that. It's really genuinely platonic. Some of my clients' spouses may have passed, and maybe they have children, and instead of launching into a new relationship that they're not ready for, they have a grieving process they need to go through.
Of
They
course.
don't want their children to be exposed to a whole lot of like transitionary people they're grieving too. It's not appropriate, but they still need a place to process some loneliness. I hear very often, so it's like just cuddling people. Yes, but what I think they underestimate is the amount of behind the scenes skill that the practitioners are bringing with them, of like, how are we navigating conversation around this? How is
Mm.
my client relating to their body? How do I help them be more aware of their body?
Welcome to the Job Dictionary podcast. Today, I'm super excited. I will be interviewing Keeley Shoup to learn about what it's like to work as a cuddle therapist for Cuddlist. She's also the CEO. Keeley, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat with you today.
When I saw this position on the list of jobs, I was like, I need to do this one. Like, this sounds super cool. And so, Keeley, we always like to ask the first three questions in your own words. What do you do? Where are you located? And when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grow up?
I'm located in Chicago and spend also a lot of time in Los Angeles, but home base is in Chicago. What I do is I am a private practice cuddle therapist, and I also own a company that trains folks to learn this modality and then be able to start their own private practices and private businesses. That's what I do. And when I was a little kid, I went through stages where I wanted to be either a vet, and then I wanted to be a mortician. I was a weird little kid. And I wanted to be a masseuse, and I wanted to be a doctor, and I wanted to be a therapist, and I probably wanted to join the circus and be an actor as well.
Yeah. Gotcha. No,
Yeah.
that's awesome. I feel like, yeah, I had like a million careers when I was a little kid too. And how long have you been working in this industry?
I discovered it in 2013, and I've had my private practice, and I've been a group facilitating boundaries and consent workshops that are touch-based since 2015.
Gotcha. And so, can you talk to us a little bit more about that? Like, what made you get started into the field, and how did you get your start?
I'd moved to a whole new city. I'd moved from Indiana to Chicago, and I was pretty isolated. And I found this thing that completely changed my world. I didn't know that it existed, and it was so beneficial to me that I found out. So I went to a friend of mine invited me to what was called a cuddle party. And these, not just like a cute colloquial name for it. There's actually a nonprofit organization that trains people to facilitate a workshop. And you
Mhm.
learn skills around boundaries and consent. You learn how to communicate. You learn how to learn what we're going to do. And then you have an opportunity to cuddle with the participants if you want to, with the facilitator there helping out and whatnot. I'd never learned all those skills. Or this is 2013. So I'd never learned all those skills about exactly how to communicate around consent or my boundaries, or it was really comprehensive and made it very approachable and comfortable. And again, I'd moved to a new city. I was pretty isolated, and all these people were so kind and so welcoming and really lovely. And so it gave me this beautiful sense of almost home in a brand new place where I was really missing home and really having a lot of homesickness. So once I found this, I was like, oh my God, this is great. And it changed so many different aspects of my life because I started bringing those skills into other places. And I realized, man, it is really powerful. The education here is really powerful. And the access to this really calm, nurturing, lovely touch is really important for my health and well-being. And so I wanted to give more people access to that.
What city was that again? I'm sorry.
This is in Chicago.
Oh,
Yeah.
gotcha. Okay.
And so I studied for a couple of years and started my private practice so that I could help more people get that and get access to that, what changed my life.
That's awesome, Keely. And so, how did you study something else before that in college? Did you go to college, or kind of what's the path like?
My family jokes about this with me a little bit now after they've been doing this for years, right? They at first were very curious about it and asked a million questions. And then they
Uh-huh.
brought up something to me that I didn't realize is when I was a little kid, my two older sisters and I would sit in front of Saturday morning cartoons. And we would do with what we joke, like 7, 8 years old, like we're young, right? And we
Yeah.
would do what we called magic fingers, which was just like drawing shapes on each other's backs or like running our hands along each other's arms, right? In that really comforting, soothing way. And my sisters wanted that so much that they would pay me like a quarter per cartoon to just do that. And so
Wow.
they're like, you've been doing this as a professional since you were like 7. And so my
It was
family
in
was,
there.
I did go to college for, I got my degree in film, theater, Japanese, and French. So I studied,
Wow. And where
I,
did you study?
I went to Ball State University in Indiana.
That's
Yeah.
and
So I'm doing something different than that now.
and so are there like certain degrees or certifications that you think are maybe not required but also help to get to this job?
I really highly recommend. There are a couple of institutions that offer really great certifications in cuddle therapy. So Cuddlist is one of them. I'm partial to it. I recently bought the company because I believed so much in it, and the owners were
Hmm.
transitioning out and retiring. And so known them and known the people who ran the company for so many years. And it's a really beautiful and it's a really great education. We actually redesigned the curriculum to include like 7+ years of industry experience. So it's really great. I also highly recommend Cuddle Sanctuary is a business based out of Los Angeles run by Jean Franzblau. Quality education there. Highly, highly recommend. Internationally, if someone's not in the United States, there's Cuddle Professionals International. Also has a really science-based comprehensive education. I've gotten through all of the programs. And if they're, like I have done, wanting to round out their education and be really thorough, anything that is body-based and a somatic therapeutic technique. So there's a technique called somatic experiencing that people can get training in. A lot of different kinds of embodiment meditation in specific can be really helpful and supplemental to this. I also have studied something called IFS, which is internal family systems. And that it helps people understand like the inner workings of their world. Because when we're doing this kind of therapy, we're bringing a lot of different aspects of ourselves, and our accessing our bodies can get really vulnerable and can bring emotions up. So we want to be able to support our clients in that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so, kind of, I'm really curious about kind of what your day to day looks like. So, what are specific tasks that take mostly a majority of your time, and like what do you spend most of your day doing? And you can describe it to me as if I was a third grader or an alien, whichever is easier for you.
Beautiful. Okay. It depends on which hat I'm wearing. So if I'm wearing my CEO hat, it's a lot of kind of your traditional boring business stuff like meetings and
Hmm.
curriculum design and advertising. So it's a lot of just pretty average business, although we're looking at it through a very different lens, right? But if we're putting on
Right.
the hat of my private practice, I get up in the morning, I might do a light workout or whatnot, but I make sure that whereas other people may not be as concerned or meticulous about kind of their body and whatnot, I really fun like, what am I eating today so I don't have bad breath
Mm.
or I don't have like I have to think about a couple different steps than maybe if I was just going into an office job. So that's part of my routine. I'm being really mindful of kind of how being really in close proximity is going to impact other people. I do some prep work for my clients, and then I might have a few clients throughout the day, maybe 3 or 4, sometimes 5, and we'll get a cuddle, we'll get to work on relational skills, we'll get to have a lot of fun, but also get really vulnerable and really emotional in those spaces. And at the end of the day, I wind down just like anybody else.
Gotcha. And so, what parts of your job are then more exciting and interesting to you?
The client work is the most fun. I really getting to witness people and learning about their stories and sharing in really healthy affection, that those are some of the best moments. Like I think most people can relate when I put it this way. Have you ever just been in this like wonderful cuddle and you kind of get floaty? Your head is a little bit like, oh, it's just so relaxing. I get to
Hmm.
experience that multiple times a day. It's pretty rad.
That's awesome. And so, what would you say like is one of the biggest misconceptions about being in cuddle therapy?
There's probably prominent ones. One
Hmm.
misconception is that this is sex work. And while I am in my personal internal politics, I think sex work is valid work. It's not my industry. It would be like if you went to a cardiologist and you were like, my bone is broken. Like, oh, you're in the wrong spot. You just go a
Mm.
couple doors down, you're just at the wrong specialist. That's one misconception. This isn't sex work in so much as any of that. It's really genuinely platonic. And some people hear that word and they they're either about what that actually means or whether that's true. Another misconception is that this is somehow, and this word is loaded and hurts my heart when I say it, but it's brought up a lot, so I think it's good to honor it. This work is pathetic. My clients are brave and beautiful and normal. I have clients who are like single moms and they touch all day long, but they're giving and giving and giving, and they just want a place where they can go. No one is going to touch them in any way they don't want to, and I can like brush their hair or just hold them for a little while so that they get something returned to them that's just about them. They don't have to worry about anybody else. I don't find that pathetic. I find that brilliant. I have clients who are in relationships going through, actually, this one is, I think, really profound. Going through a relationship transition. Some of my clients' spouses may have passed. And maybe they have children. And instead of launching into a new relationship that they're not ready for, they have a grieving process they need to go through. They don't want their children to be exposed to a whole lot of like transitionary people. They're grieving too. It's not appropriate, but they still have that. They still need a place to process some loneliness and some grief. They get to have that without any of the other stuff that's brilliant. That is smart. That's not pathetic. And so I think that the way that we utilize this work is really beautiful.
Yeah. And so would you say there are parts of the job that are maybe like hard or emotionally challenging or maybe even boring? I mean, it doesn't sound like there's a lot of boring, but maybe like emotionally challenging.
I'm going to answer the more fun first, the boring. The only time it can boring because some of my clients need aid in sleep, and they either have like maybe a insomnia or something, or maybe there's a couple different reasons for lack of sleep. And so the nervous system regulation or the holding will help them actually finally get into that rest state. And so if a client of mine, and for the amount of time, and then, at the end of the session, we let them go, but for the amount of time that they're asleep, it can get like, all right, being present with them still. The only time it ever really gets boring is if they're asleep and I'm being a support system for them in that.
Yeah, because you can't fall asleep, I'm assuming, right?
No, it wouldn't be.
Right.
I'm holding the kind of safety and the awareness of the space.
Gotcha.
Question. Sorry.
Just like any parts that are hard or emotionally challenging?
I think that a lot of people who do, I'll put it in this way. The parts that are hard are my job is to be really good about taking care of myself and my emotional needs throughout and communicating them to the clients. And this work is not in a traditional service role like we think of often, like going and getting a massage or whatnot. We're in a space where like I'm navigating my comfort on my body, and I'm going to voice it if I'm ever uncomfortable with anything. And so sometimes the educational piece about navigating those dynamics can get challenging, and I have to be really, really attentive to myself, even in a caregiving role. And so sometimes I might have the impulse to just really caretake and really focus on them. But the skill and the important thing is I have to come back to focusing on myself, which it's about.
Yeah, absolutely. And what typically look like for you? I'm curious. Like, how do you take care of yourself? Maybe like, I know this is definitely a podcast, but just if you could give like 3 pieces of advice generally on like the ways that you can take care of yourself, like what would those be?
I use my breath a lot. So if I'm ever noticing body sensations that I'm not quite sure about, I will take a big, deep, long, low inhale and a slow exhale to sort of push other things out of my mind and tune into what's going on for me. So like, why am I feeling a weird alarm bell? And then use my breath to come back to it. So using breath is really helpful. I really love the phrase, I'm noticing. And so what I might say to a client is like, I'm noticing a little discomfort in my arm. So we'll need to shift positions in a minute so it doesn't fall asleep. What might you want to do next? But it's modeling that like, I'm noticing a thing about my body, so let's be attentive to it so you can do the same thing. Or I'm noticing that this is a really intimate moment, like we're face to face, and I want a little bit of a break from that. So let's go side by side for a moment, and then maybe we can come back to that intensity. But I want a little break from that. It can look a lot of ways.
Thanks so much for providing such amazing insights. If you don't mind, we're going to transition into some rapid fire questions for you. And these are mostly like, what's a day in the life look like for you in more like specific detail, if that's okay?
Yeah, cool.
All right, let's do it. So what time do you wake up? What time do you start? And do you have any breaks in between? And what time do you end?
I wake up anywhere from 7 a.m. if I'm going to early morning Pilates to 10 a.m. I get to set my own schedule. Always rest.
End time, breaks?
And 5 p.m. so that I can have my evening. I take frequent breaks. So in between clients, I'll do about 30 minutes.
Okay. And is it slow paced or fast paced? Like, does a day go by in a blur? Are there lulls sometimes, or is it totally chill, but in a good way?
It is whatever I make it, which is kind of amazing. So I can
Yeah.
schedule a really packed day like I did yesterday, or I can schedule a really slow day like I normally do Mondays as a very slow day. And so I get to choose.
And so, what percentage would you say you're doing solo work versus like meetings or collaborating with other people? And I guess solo work might mean like client facing too. So how would like CEO maybe like how would you say that, or like a typical cuddle therapist?
Well, I have a limit for in person work based on my capacity. So I will not do more than 6 hours or 5 clients per day, whichever comes first. So that won't exceed that ever because I know myself and my system and what my capacity is. And then CEO stuff, man, if I let it, I can do that all the time because there's no one telling me hours, right? When you run
Mhm.
your own business, you have to have a lot of boundaries around when you stop.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what do you wear on a day to day basis typically?
Oh, it's phenomenal. It's like PJs and yoga pants and comfy soft sweats. That's my uniform. It's delightful.
Yes, that's awesome. And what parts of the week, month, and year are typically busiest? Like, is there a pattern to them?
Yeah, sometimes around holidays they'll pick up because people have different relationships to holidays and family. It's funny, people are a bit more active in the summer, so people will be trying it a whole lot more. And then there's more consistency in the winter because trying to get through the slog of the cold weather, you might need some cuddles throughout that.
And do you work at an office? Like, do you go somewhere or do you typically go to clients? Like, do you manage your business remotely or do you like have a space basically?
It's great the flexibility. I can travel. I can do out calls. They're different than in calls, and so there's some nuance there. Out calls being at a client location, or if I'm traveling at like an Airbnb or a space that I've set up that's temporary. And I can also work out of like the studios that I have.
And that's in Chicago? And I mean, we have a question that we ask is like, do you typically leave your work at the office or do you take some home? So are you working typically in the evenings about it or like scheduling interviews or engaging with clients even if you're not in person at anyway?
Sometimes, but again, with the to be attentive to my personal boundaries and whatnot, I have to be really good about turning off. And so
Yeah.
I'm pretty with myself about when I need breaks and when I leave work.
Yeah. And would you say the industry as like a cuddle therapist is very flexible in terms of hours? Like it's kind of, you kind of set your own schedule.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And so this is a very people, kind of like intrinsic job. So, but do you use any like tools or technologies as part of your job?
Absolutely. So there are ways that I incorporate sensory things into my work. So whether it's fidgets or sometimes, yeah, I involve sensory elements to it. Sometimes weighted blankets are helpful. Furniture pieces that are like cushy and plush. It's a lot
Mm.
about focus on textures. It's a lot of focus on the senses. So even if I'm buying a candle, I would consider that part of the room setup because the sensory experience is so important.
And Keely, is there anything that people might underestimate about this profession?
In the phrase that I hear very often. So it's like just cuddling people? Yes, but what I think they underestimate is the amount of behind the scenes skill that the practitioners are bringing with them of like, how are we navigating conversation around this? How
Mm,
is my client relating to their body? Are they're aware
right.
of like the position of their arms? So how do I help them be more aware of their body? How do I help them feel more comfortable and calm relating to me in this way? How do I help them build trust in order to get to any intimacy? So there's a lot that goes in.
Yeah. And would you say there's something that people might overestimate about the profession? Like, is there like a overhyped positive assumption about how cool your job is?
Oh my God, I wish. Well, okay, yes, actually, the way you put that was smart. When people think, "Oh my God, it's just cuddling," then I think some people who want to receive a lot of
Mm,
cuddles and imagine how wonderful that would feel might
yeah.
go in without fully like thinking about how much service and how much emotional labor it does
Right.
take to be really present for clients. It's a labor. I love it, but it is a labor, and so it's
And do you have to be careful, Keely? I'm wondering about like kind of absorbing other people's energy, or because I mean, that's what I'm saying too. It takes a lot of just kind of like emotional engagement for you as well, I'm sure.
Mhm.
And how do
That's part
you?
of yeah, absolutely. It's really important to have a very robust practice of your own energy and letting the client have theirs and having that separation.
And so, what is the fastest way to get into this profession? Like, let's say I'm someone who's from a non-traditional background and they just want to get their foot in the door.
I would say the fastest and safest way for both the person trying to get into the industry and the people who they might see is to take one of the certifications. Like I said, I highly recommend Cuddlist. It's a great one. Cuddle Sanctuary as well. And there are some others.
Mhm.
But having some kind of structure and boundaries for how to get started really helps a person be safe in their practice and safe for the people around them.
Gotcha. And would you say there are fields that people come from before typically getting into this profession? Like, is it random or are there themes to that?
There is definitely a prominence in anything that would be like a caretaking service industry type. So we have a lot of folks who transition from nursing, from therapy, from any of those teaching. We have some teachers who come in. Any of those caretaking jobs are common.
Gotcha. And does someone have to be good at someone or like doing something before they go into this job? Like, what has to come easily to you as a person?
It doesn't have to come easily from like birth, but you have to be able to develop the skills to hold really strong boundaries. That word is thrown around a lot, but you have to have a really robust practice in this business. There's nothing about the customer is always right, ever, period. It's about the
Yeah.
healthy that you're forming with someone, and that includes honoring absolutely every part of your own comfort first and foremost, and then meeting someone there. You can't be tolerating things. You can't be trying to please. People pleasers need to have a really robust practice on how to undo that conditioning before entering this.
Yeah, yeah. And how long does it usually take for somebody to get really good at this job?
Really good at it, a couple years.
Are there like certain experiences that they have to go through typically that you would say are important as a cuddle therapist? Like you sound maybe like setting boundaries is definitely like a good practice that they have to develop, but are there some other ones?
That's in cuddle therapy. We highly recommend anytime you get a training to have a consultation process or a screening process with clients before you book. So unlike like you might be familiar with the process of massage therapy where you can go to a place like Massage Envy and book and then show up, right? My clients, we go through a bit of a consultation process, and that process, it takes practice to refine what's right for you. Do you do video? Do you do phone calls? Do you meet in person? How often? What's that look like? What questions do you ask to so that process takes just some experience.
Gotcha. And Keely, are there any like promotion paths in within cuddle therapy, or are there different levels to it, right? Like what is from entry, maybe certain titles or just skills versus, at the highest level you can get in cuddle therapy, maybe like yourself, like owning your own business. What is the average time you think is spent at each?
Well, it's very individually flexible and designed. So I think the higher and more skilled you get is somewhat related to the learning that you do and the different disciplines that you study. So I am in class always. I'm always in some class perpetually. So I'm in currently in Mindlight Institute. Once I finished my IFS training, I think I'm going to go into some more deep somatic experiencing work next. And so the more you broaden and deepen your experience with the knowledge that you're learning, I think the higher you go.
Gotcha, gotcha. And what's the average salary for someone at your level? And you can provide a range, even if it's super broad.
For people just starting out immediately, right after like they've just opened shop, the minimum in the industry is about $80 an hour. And then it goes all the way up to I charge $200 an hour for in-person sessions. Kind of anywhere in that range is fairly common in the industry.
And, are there any careers? I asked you about, what other jobs people come in from, but would you say when people move on from cuddle therapy, as in like people that work in cuddle therapy, what kind of work do they often go into? Are there any themes or do they just typically springboard into like separate things at random?
To be honest, I imagine my experience in cuddle therapy is the people who find it and resonate with it and stay with it, they're like hooked. They're pretty hooked. So I don't know. But what's a really also a beautiful thing is if someone comes into the industry and finds out that the skills they use and the taxing, the way of taxing isn't the right kind of taxing for them. So they might switch to a completely different industry once they discover those things about themselves. But that's kind of like any job.
Gotcha. Yeah. Hey, are there any books, resources, programs, or certifications? You mentioned some already for certifications, but any
Mhm.
books or resources that you would recommend before getting
Oh,
into this profession?
highly recommend The Art of Receiving and Giving. It's The Wheel of Consent
Hmm.
work by Betty Martin. I highly recommend Creating Consent Culture by Marsha Baczynski and Erica Scott. I love, there's a book called Touch by Samantha Hess. There is My Grandmother's Hands by Resma Menachem and The Body Key Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Both of those have really deep dives into like how the body reacts to trauma. All these are wonderful places to get started.
Awesome. And are there any that you would not recommend that are typically like very well known?
There's one that's really well known. It's called The Ethics of Touch. And the only reason why I don't recommend it, it's got great information. It is really dry. It is very
Mm,
textbook academic. It's just, yeah, very dry. So if you can get through a book like that, it's got great information. It's just hard to get through.
gotcha, Keely. And we're gonna transition into our last question here. So, what would you tell your younger self who was just getting started into this profession?
Oh man, what would I tell my younger self? I think I would just celebrate. I think I would just celebrate with her. I would be so proud. I would tell her just how much I was ecstatic that she took this leap and that she's starting and that she's going to have so many wonderful things to look forward to just by making this decision. And it was scary and it was hard and it was absolutely the right choice. And so I would celebrate with her.
That's awesome. Thank you, Keely, so much for joining us. If guests or listeners want to reach out to you or learn more about cuddle therapy, like what's a way they can do that?
My email is open, so Keeley Shoup at Gmail, KeeleyShoup at Gmail is great. If they're looking for more information on the training, Cuddlist, so help at cuddlist.com, or they can go to cuddlist.com as a website and the information's there and they can contact through that. So either one of those places.
Awesome. Thank you, Keely, so much for joining us here at the Job Dictionary podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You just got one episode closer to learning about the world of jobs out there. To explore the rest of our career categories and find your best fit, go to jobdictionary.com to sign up for the beta users waitlist. Then subscribe here to find the next episodes coming out this week. And as always, drop us a comment, review, or message to let us know how we can better attune our episodes to your specific needs. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, X, Threads, Pinterest, and wherever else you're on socials to go get our short, snappy preview reels that expose you to new job options every day. Because here at Job Dictionary, we believe your big aha moment can be just one scroll away. Go check it out and get out there. Cheers!